If you've been listening to this podcast for a bit, then you probably know that I am fascinated with the human brain, and specifically how it runs our lives. Not just the physical parts of our beings, but the mental part, and how it hangs on to certain memories and then creates these thoughts around those memories that shape our lives. For years, personal development and thought leaders have told us that you have to change your thoughts in order to change your life. But just how far does that go? How much of your life can you change? And what specifically can you change? I like to know the details, the facts, because then it's not just this hype or woo-woo idea, it's truth. And now, thanks to technology, we have the science that proves we have the ability to alter our brains and thereby our reality. And to explain how this works, the science of our brains and our thinking, I invited neuroscientist and psychologist Dr. Hayley Nelson onto the show. This is an episode that can change your life. We explore the inner workings of your brain and how you can put your brain to work for you and create your ideal reality. It's coming up next. Stay with me. Welcome to Shift or Get Off the Pot, the podcast that helps you get out of your head and into action so you can make your dreams your reality. Let's get to it. On today's episode, I am joined by a very smart woman. She is here to help us understand our brains and specifically the inner workings of our brain and the brain-body connection, and really to break it down in layman's terms for us. She is a neuroscientist. She is a tenured psychology professor, an international speaker. And what I am most excited about is that she is the founder of the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Neuroscience, where she is making neuroscience approachable. And when I tell you that she is smart, well, here's why. She earned her PhD in psychology and brain science from the Johns Hopkins University. She has over 20 years teaching a variety of students in many different diverse backgrounds. She has several peer-reviewed research publications. She has faculty appointments with the National Institutes of Health, the Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Pennsylvania. And she is joining us today to really help us understand our brains and how we can truly put them to work for us. So welcome, Dr. Hayley Nelson.
Hi, thank you so much, Kim. I'm excited to be here today and share some neuroscience nuggets with you.
Yeah, neuroscience nuggets. And you know what I think is interesting is that it seems in recent years, there has been more emphasis on neuroscience and psychology. But I think that's interesting. Why do you think that is? Why is it that now it seems to be so prevalent?
It's about time, right? I think people are finally realizing that our brain isn't that scary, right? That it is so powerful. It does everything. It is who we are. It allows us to breathe. It allows us our heart to pump, but it also allows us to have emotions and to cry and to laugh and to be motivated to do things, but also can hinder us in certain ways. And so really understanding more about the brain, I mean, it's part of our body, right? So to be able to understand the brain is just as important as understanding our liver or understanding our lungs. We need it to survive, to be who we are. And then as we understand it, we can learn more about how just changing our mindset, for example, can then impact the physical structure of our brain, which in turn can affect our body and our entire well-being, and vice versa. What we do can in turn impact our physical structure of the brain, which then can affect our mindset. So it's this beautiful synergistic being that we are. And now finally people are realizing, hey, it doesn't have to be so scary. And that's why I created the Academy to help be that translator for people. So it's not just these only people in white lab coats that can talk about these scary things, that everybody can understand it and then use that knowledge to help themselves and help others.
Yeah, and I think that is so important to use that
Mhm.
as knowledge to help themselves and to help others. And I want to explore a little bit about what you said, and that is really the mind and understanding it and how it can really we can put it to use for us, how we can even alter our brain
Mm.
and what our behavioral patterns are just through that mindset shift and how we can make the changes in our brain. So, can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, and also to further answer your previous question, I think one of the reasons why this is becoming a hotter topic is because technology has advanced so much. We now have access to imaging studies, and then we can see, all of these mindset gurus. And I was guilty of this myself. When I was starting out with my business, people were saying, oh, you have to do personal and professional development. You have to change your mind in order to have growth in your business or to have growth in your career.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people who's like, no, I don't. I just have to do the work. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to change my mindset. I don't need to become a better person in order to be a better professor or to be a better researcher, right? And so I was definitely hesitant thinking, oh, that's all woo woo, right? That's just these gurus saying, do this, do that, meditate, blah, blah, blah. But then now using these tools of neuroscience, we can actually see the changes in the structure and the function of our brain. And so we now know through research that it isn't just woo woo, that there is hardcore scientific evidence supporting this idea of mindset and breathing routines and meditation and yoga practices and getting outside and grounding ourselves and being out in nature, that there's actual scientific evidence to show that it helps. And we can look at it from a chemical standpoint, looking at different hormones, looking at different neurotransmitters, and we can also look at it from neuroimaging studies and see different brain activations and different connections that can happen over time and through practice, that it really does change not only the physical structure of the brain, but how it works, how it functions. And this idea of neuroplasticity, that our brains are plastic, that we can change them through repetition, right? Doing these, if you just meditate once, that's not going to do anything. Maybe it'll make you feel good for, that hour or the rest of that day. But to really have change in your life and have that mindset shift, you have to rewire your brain. And we now know that that is possible.
It's putting in the reps, isn't it? It's not just a one and done. It's continuously showing up. It's like a muscle. What I found, it's like a muscle. And I'm just so excited that things have changed and that people are now seeing that it's not just this, woo woo, crazy, blah, blah, blah type of thing, that there is some scientific evidence that now backs it, because my background is in sales and in sales training. And then I owned a franchise in the personal development space because I understood that business development and personal development go hand in hand, and they really do, because it's a direct reflection, right, of who you are and what your thoughts are and how you're showing up for yourself. And so I like that you said that, because that's so important. But I learned a lot about that early on. I read Maxwell Maltz, and you probably are familiar with his study where he altered the appearance of people, but then they would come back several weeks later, because even though their outward appearance was changed, they hadn't changed their belief about what they looked like. And so I think what you're really saying is that it's just if we can change our both ways, because you alluded to that earlier. You said that it kind of works both ways, that if we can change the way we think about something, it then starts to change the decisions we make, right? And then the actions that we're taking, the results that we get.
Yeah. And sometimes for some people, they respond better for just doing the action, right? Start with the behavior, and certain behaviors can boost different chemicals, for example, that can ramp up neuroplasticity and kind of make it easier for you. And then the mindset shift comes later. Sometimes people need to focus on just reading the book and not doing necessarily actionable things, but more cognitive things and thinking about it, that can then change the brain, and then that can change the body and the behavior. So the beautiful thing is there is no cookie cutter way to do this. We are all so unique. Our brains are so unique. There's upwards of 80 to 100 billion neurons in the average adult human brain. And each one of those upwards of 100 billion neurons has 10,000 connections with other neurons. it's infinite number of possibilities and ways that each one of us, even genetically identical twins, can respond differently and react differently. And so because we're so unique, we need to have a unique way to be able to allow it to help us. Now, of course, there are more tried and true methods that have been shown through research and through experience that are more effective and can help you get there quicker. And of course, I'm one of those people. It's like, I don't want to spend years working on this. I want actionable results right here and now. So yes, I'm going to listen to the science and see, okay, if I incorporate exercise, if I incorporate breathing routines, if I do this repetition, if I get those, a boost of dopamine as I'm trying to build new habits, I can facilitate this process even faster so that I can see results faster and therefore have more of that permanent change that we're all seeking.
Yeah, that permanent change, because that's really what the key is, isn't it? It's kind of like you want this, and yet you take a few steps forward, but then boom, it's kind of like you're holding back. And why do you think that is, though? Is it just that because we have this self-doubt, is that we have these stories that we're telling ourselves, the self-sabotage, the fear of success, failure, whatever it is? Is it just this, I almost liken it to like this inner script or dialogue that's just been running in the back of our minds forever? Why do you think that we just hang on to that stuff, though?
It's easier. Right? Yeah. It served a purpose for us at some point in our life, having that self-doubt, thinking small, being that quiet person who didn't maybe necessarily push themselves. At some point in our life, it served us, right? There must have been something that happened in childhood or in adolescence or even, a few years earlier that it created this pathway in our brain that became automatic. Our nervous system is all about automation. It wants to do things as quickly as possible in order to save us. It has a survival, adaptable response, right? Whether it's a bear charging towards us or it's, that career advancement that you're reaching for. Either way, that's a stimulus in our environment, and our nervous system is set up to recognize it and to act and respond immediately without having to think and make decisions. Every single choice that we make, we need to automate things. So what happens is through practice, as we continue to exhibit those behaviors or thoughts, the more we do it, the stronger those connections become. And so it's like the stream running down a hill. It's just going to go along the path of least resistance. The water is not going to go up the mountain, right? You need to have some kind of a pump or some system to get it to go up. It's going to just follow gravity, go down along the path of least resistance. And now all of a sudden, here comes you, right? Saying, okay, well, we need to change our mindset. We need to make these changes in our life. And then you're going to hit that resistance. That's basically asking that river or that stream to start flowing up the mountain. And it doesn't want to do that. It wants to do what it's always done because it's been the easiest, most adaptable response up until that point. But then when you make that decision that, hey, this no longer serves me, and sure, maybe it's something that is automated, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Right? Mm-hmm. These can be bad habits that become automated. And so to change them, you're going to have that resistance. So there's different tricks and tools to make that resistance a little bit less powerful so that you can now start repeating these other thoughts and these other actions to allow neuroplasticity to occur, to allow that brain and those connections to actually form so that those become the new automated and automatic thoughts and behaviors. So it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, but you're going to get that resistance. And again, at some point it had a survival value, right? And that's why we have it. And then now you're trying to teach your brain, no longer does this serve me to survive. I need to make this change. And then you have to put in the work once you've made that decision to now create this new pathway, the new wiring in your brain to say, no, this is what is really going to serve me. And over time and through repetition, it can, in most cases, actually make that change so that can be the automatic response. And so instead of having those negative self-talk and the negative self-esteem, now you'll start having positive affirmations and things that are going to motivate you and help push you forward instead of holding you back.
I like the idea of the fast track, right? It's kind of like, let's get into action, let's move forward, and let's get it done. And I'm not one to look at things and say, oh my gosh, I have to go all the way back to my early childhood and figure out why all this happened, right? And I want to know, well, there's a couple of things that you said right there that I want to delve into a little bit further. But number one is you mentioned that there are certain tips and tricks that you can use to help yourself to then start creating these new neural pathways. So what are some of those tips and tricks?
So first, we've mentioned it, repetition, right? So things, we have to do them, whether you like them or not. So there's things that you can do to make it more enjoyable. And when I say enjoyable, I'm referring to dopamine, right? So I love neurotransmitters. Dopamine's my favorite neurotransmitter. That's what I studied for my PhD work. And so to help motivate people, you need that dopamine release. And we can get that through things that are pleasurable. So breaking tasks down into smaller, manageable pieces or chunking them to allow us to continually get these dopamine releases to reward us is going to make that big dreaded, task seem much more manageable. I mean, if you wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon, you don't just decide that when you're 50 pounds overweight and haven't put on running, you don't even own running shoes, right? You have to start small. And so you go research and you buy those running shoes and you reward yourself with that. And then you start small, you run maybe a mile one day. I'm not a runner, so I don't really know how the training would go for that. But you don't just get up and run 26 and change miles in one day. You have to work up to it. And so I think that's the first thing, is being able to give yourself the little boost of dopamine every once in a while to keep you motivated, to keep you engaged and wanting to continue, so that you continue to have that repetition. So you need to have repetition. And then, that one trick is to give you the dopamine to get there. Another really important chemical that is recently been shown to improve neuroplasticity is a chemical, the acronym is BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotropic factor. And we've known this chemical exists for a very long time, but we didn't really understand this idea and concept of how it can actually help facilitate neuroplasticity. And this chemical is actually released when we exercise. So through aerobic activity, you can release BDNF from our muscles, and then our brain is able to activate it. And what it does is it serves as a neuroprotective factor. So it's going to prevent our cells from damage. So it's going to prevent the cells from dying. And it's going to help facilitate that neuroplasticity. So when I'm talking about neuroplasticity, there's actually, if you have one neuron here and one neuron here, and there's a connection, but now all of a sudden we want to get rid of this connection and create a connection up here, neuroplasticity is actually creating that new connection, that new synaptic integration is what we call it, to create these new synapses and connections. And BDNF can help facilitate that new synaptic integration. So even if your big end goal has nothing to do with physical activity, I use the example of running a marathon. If it has nothing to do with that, still, if you can incorporate physical activity, especially aerobic activity, into your day, you're going to help make that neuroplastic change actually easier, because you're facilitating that process. So repetition, and then also adding the BDNF if you can, adding the dopamine in different pieces when you can. And then the last bit of advice is to tie emotion to it. Mm-hmm. So we have evolved as humans to have emotions, right? If you look at our great ancestors, and even you look at a rat or a camel, I don't care, pick an animal, they don't necessarily have emotions. They're not laughing, they're not crying, right? They'll show fear. There's certain emotions that are ingrained, and has been conserved through evolution. But a lot of what makes humans human is this idea of that we have emotions. And so let's say your goal is to, lose 50 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever it is. Instead of just saying, oh, I want to do it so I can have a better bikini body by summertime, that's not really tying an emotion to it. But if you say, I want to lose that weight so that I can have more energy to be present with my kids, so that I'm not winded when I'm chasing after the soccer ball when I'm outside playing with my kids, or I want to improve my health so that I can be there at their high school graduation and be present, or walk them down the aisle when they're getting married, whatever it is, and how does that make you feel? right? Tying that emotion to that end goal. I want this promotion at work because it's going to give me more money. That's, kind of surface level. But then what can you do with that money? I can spend more time with my family taking these vacations. And what's that going to feel like when I get to experience these different cultures through my children's eyes? And, really tying that emotional piece and that emotional component to it allows for that repetition, the dopamine release to be that much stronger so that it facilitates that neuroplasticity even more. So emotion, repetition, if you can incorporate dopamine, and then of course BDNF, those are my take-home tips to really try to help boost that neuroplasticity.
3 great tips. Great tips. Is the BDNF the same as like endorphins?
No, so the endorphins are another fantastic hormone or neurochemical. So endorphins like adrenaline, norepinephrine, these are released. They're also pleasurable chemicals, right? So they feel good and they're rewarding. So with endorphins, they're released actually as part of the stress response is one way and to alleviate pain. So there are natural opiates, right? And they feel good. I mean, heroin feels good. Otherwise it wouldn't be so addictive, right? Those are opiates. And so we naturally create these opiates that can be released. And one of the catch-22 about endorphins is that because they feel so good and because they can lead to addiction, sometimes self-defeating, painful behaviors and thoughts can end up becoming addictive because you're hurting yourself, whether emotionally, and our brain can't really distinguish between emotional pain or physical pain. Breaking your leg changes and it creates the same chemical reaction and activity in our brain as breaking up with your boyfriend or being broken up with, right? Or a loss of a loved one. We see the same brain activity for both physical pain and emotional pain, and endorphins are released to alleviate that pain. And so what can end up happening in certain individuals, we can see that this reward pathway and everything kind of gets activated, and it can lead to addiction-like tendencies. And sometimes it makes it that much harder to stop certain habits, some self-sabotaging behaviors and thoughts, because not only is it something that is automated and, your brain has been doing that forever, it seems like, but it's also an addiction. And, and I'm using that term loosely,
Right.
but we can see that it activates the same circuitry and the same neurochemicals. So it makes it that much harder to then change that behavior. And those thoughts as well. So when I say behavior, I also am including our cognition, our thoughts as well, because that is a behavior. So it in some ways can be very good. It can help facilitate new positive habits, but it can also make it harder to break some of those old habits that have served us. And by serving us means that it released some of those opiates. It made us feel better when we did some of those self-sabotaging behaviors that now, it's not necessarily helping us anymore. Procrastination is a great example of that. And I'm guilty of it, right? Just little behaviors like that. I'm addicted to procrastination. Why? Well, it makes me more stressed out when I have a tight deadline and I wait until the last minute to get it done. And if I'm stressed out, guess what's part of that stress response? The endorphin release, right? And so certain behaviors like that can almost become addictive, and then it makes it that much harder to change.
I think it's fascinating that there is really, the brain cannot differentiate between the physical or the emotional abuse. I think I have always found that to be fascinating. And in that, I think are the seeds to be able to now change and flip that into what you truly want. And so I kind of want to take what you just said and bring it back to something you were talking about earlier. And that was about making a decision to change. Because when you have somebody if somebody is, let's say, engaged in self-destructive behavior, and again, it doesn't have to be this horrible addictive behavior, like cutting yourself or something, but it's, let's say it is something like perfectionism, busy work, procrastination. You know that you have a deadline, but you just wait until the 11th hour, right? Okay. Where does, and a part of me has this vision of you with this white lab coat on, and putting all these little
I'll have to send you some pictures of me in my white lab coat.
Truthfully, though, kind of like, okay, let me see what's going on here. Where's this? What part of the brain is this activating? But how does decision take place? Like, what's the thing that kind of is fueling the decision to make somebody say, enough? Because you kind of hear this with people that have addictive behaviors or like alcoholics, like everybody has a bottom, right?
Yeah.
So is there something, or will we have the ability to help maybe shorten that bottom so that people can make a decision faster so that they don't have to go through destructive behavior?
So I think you need to go on and study for your PhD and start doing this kind of research, because it is being done. So, there's decision making is a whole field in neuroscience, and they're using animal models with mice and rats so they can actually look at the genetics, but then even monkeys. I was actually, part of my work for my PhD work was working in a monkey lab where these monkeys were making decisions. And, do you go for that immediate reward, the small reward right away, or can you hold off and wait for a bigger reward later, right? And then at what point does your decision switch? Right? You can hold out, and then eventually you're just like, screw it, give me that candy bar instead of waiting till the end of the month for a big piece of cake and a party, right? At what point, and a lot of that has to do with the value of what it is that you're making the decision on, because there's always going to be two choices at least, right? So what is that incentive value or the motivation behind it? And all of these things have to do with dopamine, right? That's not the only thing that it has to do with, but dopamine stamps in that incentive reward value for your choices, for the decisions that you make. I use the example of, let's say you're going through the grocery store and you see brown bruised bananas, or you see these bright, beautiful yellow bananas. Which ones are you going to pick? And pretty much everybody, unless you're making a banana bread, is going to pick the beautiful yellow, fresh bananas. And that was a choice that you made because dopamine stamped in that, hey, this yellow color and these fresh bananas taste better. They have a more rewarding value to them. And dopamine stamped that in. So you don't have to think about it when you're in the grocery store. You just automatically do that. And so what we need to do when you're talking about behavioral change is figure out, how can I increase that motivational and rewarding value of this choice? And that's where emotions can come into play, right? Where I was talking about, just saying you want to get that promotion at work to make more money is not as motivating as, I want to get this promotion at work so that I can give for my family more, so that I can provide, or maybe I can give back to the community more. Whatever it is that's going to motivate you, you increase the value of that decision to allow you to make that choice, right? And so that's, again, there's so many different avenues that you can go when you're talking about decision making. And then there's this whole economics portion of it, and like actually looking at how you value one thing. And then there's the cost benefit analysis. I mean, it's huge. I mean, you can study this and never even talk to another human being. You're just looking at, graphs and charts and algorithms, and you're just sitting in front of a computer and investigating and asking these questions. But from a behavioral neuroscience perspective, when you're talking about what is it that's going to actually get you to make that choice, it's because dopamine put a value to that choice, and then that becomes what you're going to work harder for. So whatever it is that you value is what you're going to work harder to achieve, if that makes sense. So sometimes people have to do a values audit. Yeah. And sit back and think, well, what is it that I'm valuing more in my life? What is it that is most important to me? And then how am I showing up in my life? Where is that disconnect? Right? And then so sometimes there's wheel of life exercises, for example, that I sometimes work with people and I provide for my students to just kind of practice and say, okay, what are my values? And then how am I actually showing up in this world? Where is that disconnect? Where am I succeeding? And celebrate those successes. But where are areas that are causing extra stress in my life that I might not have even recognized? And then start there. Start with those topics to then be able to start with those small decisions to be able to make yourself more in line with your true values. And sometimes you have to shift. Sometimes you might say, oh, I value money and my career way more than I should. And I'm showing up at work more than I am for my family, but I should be, and I don't want to say should because I don't like shoulding on people. But there's some times where your values is, you'll almost look back and say, where did I fall off the wagon? Where did
Yeah.
my values shift? And then so doing, it's just an audit of your value system. If we take, if companies do quarterly statements and audit their business every quarter, why aren't we doing that for our own personal development and lifestyle as well? And I think that we should, so that we can make sure that we are in alignment.
Well, I think self-awareness is absolutely key,
because
it's the thing that allows us to really understand, what do I really want? Not just what do I say I want, because there often is a disconnect between what you say you want and the actions that you're taking and what you're doing and the decisions that you're making. But one of the things that you just mentioned then is really the emotion. And when you're just giving the example of, okay, let's say somebody is spending more time at work and they're chasing the money and they're spending all that time there and they're realizing that their values are a little bit off kilter here. They're getting a dopamine hit though, right? Because they're getting a dopamine hit or something that is kind of keeping them in that area in almost, what would you call it, like a habit loop?
Yeah. I mean, they're in that habit, and at some point it served them, that it was giving them that dopamine. And then every single time you do it, your brain is naturally going to release dopamine because it's rewarding you to continue to do those behaviors. But then when you want to change it, that's where you're going to have that resistance. So, and then you're not going to get the dopamine when you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, or should be doing. Again, using the terms that I don't like to use, but then all of a sudden you're trying to change it. And sometimes you have to take those baby steps and say, instead of putting in 60 hours on my business or at work, I'm just going to, cut it down by 5 hours a week, just so I can be more present at home, or, just do a little bit at a time. You can't just go from 60 hours a week to 40 hours a week. That will hurt, right? That will actually cause more pain and won't be productive. And you might have some resentment towards making that decision. So it's that chunking that behavior, breaking it down, finding other ways to get that dopamine hit to replace what you have. Create a new addiction that's a healthier addiction than
get a reward. Give yourself a reward somewhere in there. Yeah. I like that you brought up and put so much emphasis on the emotion and emotional triggers, because that was one of the things I learned early on in sales and as a sales trainer. And then when I started my own business, because I realized that emotion is so strong that not everybody's obviously motivated by money. It's always what it does for you, right? But I really started incorporating it into my visualizations and using it in a sense to create a memory of a future that I hadn't lived yet. Because I felt like, okay, if I have all these other memories that maybe are serving me or not serving me, why can't I create a memory of something that I want, and then really tying in the emotion of it? But I got to the point where I would see myself walking into sales appointments, or, now with a new client, and it would be like, I had to make it so real that if I had a smoothie in my hand, it'd be like me juggling all my stuff and kind of spilling that smoothie on myself as I got in the car, only because it solidified it in my mind. And so I always thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, I was thinking, well, maybe that's just taking it deeper into my subconscious and helping me to say, okay, this is truly believable to me, because this is truly something that would happen, rather than just, it was almost harder to walk myself through the scenario, because it wasn't as believable unless I could pull something in that was just so me, or that had happened before. And then I was using that to tie that emotion in. And I will tell you, oh my gosh.
It worked, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw huge changes I'll tell you, when I started my business again after I got divorced and I started a whole nother business, 2 months. Yes, there was all the legwork and stuff that I had to do. So I was getting the foundation set, but the real shift came when I really started leaning in. I went back to, wait a minute, Kim, what are you doing? Get back into creating that in the emotion within 2 months. 3 different income sources, multiple 6-figure. And it was because and I thought, okay, this stuff works. This is not woo. This is why I love that you say there's science backing it now, because it changes it.
Yeah, we can see that. So what you experienced is actually backed by science. So I can't tell you how many times people have said, oh, do a vision board, right? Take newspaper clippings and magazine clippings and just put it on your wall and look at it every day. And I would do it begrudgingly, just because somebody told me to do it. I was like, oh, I might as well. Oprah told me to do it. I should do it, right?
It's got to be
And
right.
so I think Oprah did come out with that whole do a vision board, and everybody kind of picked up on that. But it didn't really work. And so then I was just like, vision boards, there's nothing to it. But then, just as you said, when you can tie that emotion to it, and if you can tie all of your senses into it, right? You having that smoothie, you were probably visualizing how that smoothie tasted, how it felt on your tongue, what it emotionally felt like when you got that deal, when you landed it. What was the sun out looking like that day? How did the clothes on your back feel? Really tying in all of those visual as well as emotional, auditory, tactile, all of your senses coming into play. The more true you can make that visualization, your brain will create, and the more you repeat it, right? You can't just have that visualization once and then that's it, right? You have to experience it every single day, multiple times a day, and you continue to do it. And then guess what's happening? You're doing repetition. You're doing things that feel good. You're actually creating new neural pathways in your brain of this visualization that you experienced, to the point where now you are making decisions in your life as if you have already achieved whatever you're visualizing. So if your end goal is you want to own your own private island, right? Visualize having that private island. What does the sand feel like under your toes? What is it, and then talk about tie the emotions into it, all of that. So now when you're in that, when you have to make that decision, should I do this? Should I make this choice or this choice for my business or for my career? Your brain is going to be automated, as we've talked about, but it's going to be automated using the pathway that you have created, having achieved what your goal is. And so now you're making decisions as if you've already achieved them. And that's why you got that success so quickly, because you were making the right choices, because you were working towards that goal, that outcome that you wanted. Right. And so there is scientific evidence. You can actually see that neuroplasticity, that your brain, the visualizations, the more real you can make them, your brain can't really distinguish between fiction and reality, the stronger that it is. Right. So is that a true memory, or is that a visualization? Your brain doesn't care.
Yeah.
It's there. And the stronger that connection is, that's what's going to be the automatic pathway that you're going to take. That's going to be the path of least resistance. So it absolutely does work. And it's not just woo-woo.
No, it isn't. And that's the thing. I kind of gave myself an experiment. I mean, I'd done that years before in sales, and I'd done that, with the personal development franchise and things that I'd learned. But, it was just like, why? I kind of, I will think I kind of just let it go. It's not that I forgot it, but I wasn't practicing it as much because it was different for me. I had been raising 4 kids. Things had changed. I knew I was going to get back into starting a business again, but my mind wasn't on that. It was more about, let's go have fun. Let's do this, with the kids and stuff. And so it changes things. And then as I started to, step back into business and looking at things and going, I really want to set some other goals, monetary goals, things like that. But I'm always fascinated by that. And I know that for quite a number of years, I was kind of frustrated with the fact that we had the subconscious and we have the conscious. And I remember always thinking, reading books and seeing things about how, this one's working for you and this one's not working. It was more about it being negative, like it's not working for you. It's kind of pulling you back into the safe and familiar. And it was really learning to shift that way I looked at it, I guess, or the belief around it, and not looking at it as something that's just pulling me back all the time, but saying, okay, if I want this thing to work for me and I want to bring them into alignment, because that's what my goal was. I got to bring my subconscious and conscious into alignment. And for me, it was like, how fast can I do that? And instead it was like, what language, how am I talking to my subconscious? Like changing the words I was using.
Yeah. And I personally don't use the term conscious and subconscious. I look at it, as a neuroscientist, I'm like, okay, well, what neurons are activated and what structures in the brain? And so what you're referring to when you're talking about the subconscious mind are those habits, are those deeply rooted, ingrained behaviors and thought patterns that, again, at some point it served us. It was protecting us. It was familiar. It was adaptive. And now all of a sudden you need to change it, right? And so you change your self-talk, you change your behaviors, you change your action. And the more you repeat them, then you can rewire your brain to allow those new, healthier thoughts, actions, talk, whatever it is, to become that automatic process and have them work together, right? And so this idea of, this, what many people refer to as the subconscious, is just beyond your conscious awareness, right? You're not sure, you know that, oh, I'm drinking orange juice right now. That's in your conscious awareness. You know that you're doing it. But then there's some deep-rooted behaviors and habits and thoughts that are beyond your conscious awareness that you still do. You can see the action, you can see the behavior, but what is the root cause, that underlying mechanism to do it? And it's still, a neuron's a neuron. It doesn't matter if this neuron is part of your habit, like basal ganglia system, or your emotional area with the amygdala. It's still a neuron, and it's still using the same way to communicate. And so now you just have to tweak it so that you're changing those patterns to be more adaptable for what you currently want and what your goals currently are, and not whatever they were when that habit started. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that's really makes me look at it and think of it more like that neuroplasticity, because it's not like it's two separate minds. It's not like it's here. It's just a matter of, that's the seat of the habits, the past behaviors, and the things that maybe you want to now start to change. Yeah. And the beauty of it is you get to change it. You can change it.
That's the hope. And a lot of times people, especially, I'll encounter students and other people that, they've experienced trauma or severe adversity in their life, and they created these survival mechanisms to protect them, and they feel helpless, right? That this is just who I am. This is just how I do things. They're stuck in this rut of, a depression cycle or anxiety cycle. And I'm not saying that everybody can just be healed through mindset work. Absolutely not. Some people need pharmacological help, need additional, different types of therapies and things like that. But it certainly isn't going to hurt. There is that hope that it can change. We can see the brain change. There are imaging studies of people who go through cognitive behavioral therapy, and you can see that from, activation in their amygdala versus their frontal cortex, when they were in a depressed state, to now having gone through that therapy, or if it's medical assisted therapy, we can see how the brain actually changes. And so there is hope that, because we have a plastic brain, that it's not just set in stone. And even though we might have had some adversity in our life, and some very severe and traumatic, there still is hope that any positive shift is a change in the right direction. And so we can rewire our brain, and we can change to help our lives thrive instead of just survive.
And it's not just a matter of then really of saying, okay, affirm, and just believe it. And eventually, that it will eventually, right, start to make the changes neurologically in your brain. But there is actually something going on there. There is actually a change that's taking place. So if people are on, let's say, you mentioned depression, people are on medication, and is it that, because what I've seen people that are, I know plenty of people that take, let's say, antidepressants, but they don't do therapy work. And I'm always thinking, don't you really need both? Because the two kind of have to work hand in hand to make some changes. They do have a
synergistic. Yeah. So we do see some synergy with it. So if you're just looking at depression, for example, typically what we'll see is an overactive part of your brain known as your amygdala, which is really kind of coined your emotional center of your brain. It does many other things as well, but let's just call it the emotion center, right? So it's overactive. And your frontal cortex, which is more your executive functioning, your decision making, your future planning, that's underactive when you are in that depressed state. And you want it switched, right? In most situations, you want a fully functional frontal cortex and just a functioning amygdala. You don't want it to be running the show. And so if you take medications, for example, what they can do is just lessen the effect of the amygdala, which allows your frontal cortex to kind of step up and start running the show. Now, if you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, it doesn't necessarily target the amygdala, but what it does is it targets that frontal cortex to ramp up, and then it hinders that overactivity of the amygdala over time. But if you do both of them at the same time, I mean, you're killing two birds with one stone here, right? So you're directly targeting the amygdala through the medication, and you're targeting your prefrontal cortex through the cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you get the end result quicker. And everybody wants quick, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so
Fast track it.
not only do you get there quicker, but it's longer lasting. The therapy, the talk therapy has longer lasting effects. The medications, while they can work for many people, not all, you're eventually going to build a tolerance to it. So you're going to have to increase your dosage over time. It's going to stop working. And then what happens when you reach the max and your doctor will no longer prescribe you a higher dosage? Then you either have to switch medications or try something else. Whereas if you start that cognitive behavioral therapy from the beginning, then you have that long lasting change that eventually you might not need medication anymore. That's the hope, right? That you don't have to live the rest of your life taking these medicines. And I'm not somebody who's saying don't take medicine at all. That is not my platform at all.
Yeah.
I think that there's absolutely a time and a place and a use for these medications or other supplements. But if you're only using that as a clutch, and as a crutch, I mean, then it's hindering you, right?
Right.
Build up all the tools in your tool belt so that you have more at your disposal and longer lasting, more permanent change instead of just that quick fix.
Because the human brain is absolutely like the human body. I mean, it's fascinating, and it's amazing just how it can work for us. And how it can protect us. Let's talk a little bit about your academy, because when I first met you, probably 4 years ago, and I had you on the summit at that time, and you were just starting that. You were just starting to get it together, and then you were doing some beta testing and such. So I would love for you to explain a little bit about the academy, how it works, if you're taking people through courses and what they can expect.
Yeah, so I created the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Neuroscience because I discovered that there was really this desire to learn more about the brain, especially from helping professionals like coaches and therapists and counselors, teachers, educators, right? They wanted to be able to use this knowledge about the brain to help their clients better and their patients and their students better, and also help the community at large, right? To help people through mental health concerns. But they just didn't know where to turn. They didn't want to go back to school. They didn't want to go back and get an advanced degree, but they wanted to learn what they needed to know in bite-sized pieces. And people kept coming to me. They're like, hey, Dr. Hayley, I really love the way that you explain this. Can you explain it to me? And then I said, after getting this for a very long time, I said, why aren't I charging for this? Right? My brain isn't free for everybody. It is, but it was just, I wanted to help more people. So I created this academy to be able to have a greater reach. And so that was 4 years ago when I initially launched it, did a lot of testing, talked to, countless counselors and therapists to try to figure out what topics were most important for them to be able to have that knowledge, and created a whole curriculum with various modules to certify them in cognitive and behavioral neuroscience so that they can have their credentials, but then in addition to it, to help them stand out in their industry, as instead of just saying, oh, I'm a life coach with a certification in cognitive and behavioral neuroscience, to show that authority that they can actually talk about the brain and how it can lead to these lasting changes for individuals. And it's just been so wonderful. The students have given me nothing but positive feedback, and I have lots of graduates now, and they're doing amazing work. And I love it when new people are asking me more questions about it. So if anybody's listening and wants more information about it, please don't hesitate to find me online on social media and ask away. And either me or somebody on my team will be able to help answer those questions. And hopefully, if a certification will work for you, let's get you in and you can be one of our students and get certified and be able to help more people. It's been so much fun. I love it.
I just love that you're making it approachable, because I obviously love the study of the brain, the study of our behaviors, our patterns, and how we can kind of, let's get rid of the blocks. Because really what I do in working with people is go and look at their self-doubt, or there's a block that's just limiting you. Because I can give you all the action plans. You've got the blueprint, but why aren't you taking action? Well, we know that there's a block there. Okay. So how can we get rid of that block? And so for me, it's always been fascinating just to understand that and say, again, I don't think you have to go all the way back. I think you just go, look, this is what it is. Let's make some changes, create new neural pathways, and move forward. But I love that you're making it approachable, because as much as I thought, I'd love to go back to school and learn more of this and study this, I'm like, I'm not putting on a lab coat. I'm not going to be doing this. You know what I mean? All those things.
I don't want to sit next to an 18-year-old and have homework. And Yeah.
And I'm not dissecting a frog. I'm sorry.
No, and I think that you hit the nail on the head right there, that it is approachable, that I break it down to what is it that you truly need to know so that you can have greater impact. And so if you're giving all of these tools to your clients, but they're resisting, now all of a sudden you can say, hey, I'm telling you to do this positive affirmation or these visualizations because science has backed it. And let me explain to you how and why. And here's some literature to help support what we're doing. And your clients will have more buy-in. And then they'll actually listen to you more, right? In many cases, not always, but in many cases, they'll say, okay, she actually does know what she's talking about. This is backed by science. It's not just some woo-woo trend. And let me give it a try. She knows what she's talking about. And that's the impact that I'm seeing a lot of my students have. And beyond making it approachable, I also wanted to make it accessible. So it's self-paced. Right. So if you want to work on it at 2:00 in the morning, because that's what your schedule allows, then you can do that. And of course, I chunked it into small bite-sized pieces. So the modules each have multiple sections within them that you can get to in small chunks of time.
And get the dopamine hit.
Exactly. So you accomplished it. You've completed it. You get that dopamine hit. Here's additional resources and videos and activities. I created a lot of interactive activities like crossword puzzles even to help you learn the material in a really fun, interactive way that you have lifelong access to, including any updates. So new research that comes out, I plop it back into the course. So even 3-4 years from now, you'll have access to cutting edge research. You have lifetime access to the course and to the curriculum.
Great. Well, I'll be a student at some point, probably right after the holidays, after the fall or after the holidays. Yeah. That's exciting. I'm really happy for you. I'm really happy to see that you did this because I know you were thinking about it. You're trying to get some things going on it. And, I applaud you for that because it's not easy to do. I mean, it does take some effort and you have to pull it all together and you have to get the feedback from everybody. But I'm really happy that you did this and I'm glad you're seeing the success with it and people are really enjoying it as well.
Yeah, it's so fun and so rewarding. And yeah, it was a lot of hard work, but I wanted to make sure that whatever I put out there was not only what people needed and wanted, but it also represented me that I could be proud of and put my name behind it. And the students who go through it, that certification actually has value. They had to work for it. It's not just an easy A, so to speak, right? You have to put in the work and put in the effort. And once you've earned it, it means something. It has value. And I'm really, really proud of it. It's my third child. I have 2 boys, 2 human babies, and then this is my third child. Or 4th, if you count my husband as one of my children. No, I'm just kidding. But it is an extension of my family. I love it. I'm so proud of it. And I can't wait to share it and continue to share it with the world because I really know that it has huge impact.
Yeah. And that's great. And you certainly have the credentials behind you to be teaching this and sharing this information. So we will include a link to your information where they can get a hold of you and the Academy as well in the show notes down below. So if anybody wants to reach out to you or find out more about the Academy, they can do so just down below in the show notes. Dr. Hayley Nelson, thank you so much for being here today and sharing just all kind of the little intricacies that are going on in our minds, in our brain, and how we can really put them to use for us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun, and hopefully we'll stay in touch more and be able to continue these conversations again in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me here today. If you want some help achieving your goals, you can grab the success bundle that is linked down below, or you can join the challenge that I have coming up. The challenge is designed to help you align with your goals, get out of your head, get into action so you can achieve what it is that you say you want. You have the ability. Let's just get going and get it done. I'll be back again soon with another episode of Shift or Get Off the Pot.